So welcome, and it's great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you.
I cannot imagine writing 100 novels. That's incredible.
I can't imagine it either, given that in high school and most of college, I was a slacker. So I'm not sure what happened to me when I got to be in my late 20s, but I suddenly got productive. I think it was realizing what the alternative was, which was destitution, I guess.
Well, you've written a lot of books. I just read your most recent one. I just finished The Galley of Elsewhere. It's phenomenal. I absolutely loved it. Tell me, where did the genesis of the story idea for this one come from?
Sometimes you know where it came from, and it starts with a premise, something you thought of, something you saw somewhere, and then other times they start with characters, and you have no story to go with them. This is one of those. I was doing something else. I wasn't doing anything related to work. And suddenly it came into my head that I'd never written a story with a father-daughter relationship. It was really positive and kind of upbeat and fun to read. I thought, I really want to do that, and someday I'll have to. And the next, about 30 seconds later, I thought, what if the father and daughter, the mother walked out on them 7 years ago, the daughter's now 11. She yearns for the mother. They don't know whatever happened to the mother. And I thought, well, now it's starting to get more interesting. And I started getting who these two characters were. And then it suddenly thought, okay, it's going to be a story to some extent about rebuilding this family. And I read a lot of science, quantum mechanics, and anything associated with it has always been an interest of mine. And part of that was the multiverse, the parallel worlds. I never thought I'd write a parallel world story because it'd get too over the top. But here I suddenly had a human story of this little broken family. And I thought, I don't know why. This is why it's so mysterious that what we do. Came into my head, this is a multiverse story, because if you talk about parallel worlds, somewhere the mother lives that they've lost. And this becomes, in part, a search for that mother, which it is, but then it's a lot more beyond that. And when I had that much, then it was, how do they end up going to another parallel world? That introduced the character of Spooky Ed. And from that moment on, I couldn't wait to get to the keyboard fast enough. I knew how much fun this was going to be.
I love family is a wonderful central theme that I think resonates with so many people. So it's an excellent novel. So Dean, during your illustrious career, you've had to weather some challenging feedback from certain publishers saying, that you had too many point of views in your book, or that you had several different genres in one book. And if there are any newer authors listening today, what advice would you give them? What rules should they break, and what rules shouldn't they?
Wow, I tend to break almost all of them if I want. I don't know that I recommend that, but I will say this. I'm going to write about a memoir about this career, not naming names so much as just discussing things that happened in the course of it. Because some of it's pretty funny and a lot of it's pretty awful. But from the outside, it's always looked, I think, to a young writer, because that's what I hear from them. Like I've had this smooth ascent that just was on this upward arc for a long, long time. It was never smooth. It was always a struggle. There were always many people telling me, you can't do that. This is going to destroy your career. Or you'll never build a career because of the way you're doing things. And you have to take that seriously to some extent. But when you keep hitting that wall, at some point you have to say, well, I'm going to write what I want to write. And if it's not perceived properly, that's just going to have to be the way it is. And the biggest one was something you just referenced, the cross-genre thing. Somebody said quite a long time ago that I created the cross-genre novel. I don't know if that's true. I never set out to do it, but I do know that when I started doing it, it was a long, long time ago. Then I started getting resistance from publishers. A lot of publishers, not all of them, I'm with right now are not this way. But a lot of publishers, if you were to write a book about somebody who worked in a foundry, then you've got to have foundry man novels for the rest of your career. They want you to be locked into something you can label and produce time after time. which is an underestimation. So I can remember, it started really all the way back to stuff like Whispers. And after I wrote Whispers, they insisted I go write a horror novel. I said Whispers wasn't a horror novel, but I'll write you one if that's the only thing you buy from me. It's going to be a sort of different horror novel. And that when I delivered it, they said, this is too horrific for a horror novel. And it's not a bloodfest or anything like that. But what really upset them was there were other elements to it. Sort of a police procedure was supernatural, or seemed to be. It had a science fiction explanation. It was a story of two sisters, and all of this, and that got me in trouble. And book after book, that was the case. So what I say to writers is, you can go out and scope the market and then write zombie novel 2,566, or you can do what you're passionate about. But when you do what you're passionate about, it's probably going to be a little different, and that's where you're going to meet some of that resistance. But you have to be diplomatic. Don't tell them you're an idiot, because a lot of them are pretty smart about what they're publishing, but they get stuck in this rut. And if you're doing something different, they don't want to relate to that. They don't want to move with that. But you just have to persevere. Perseverance, I've said many times, is equal to talent. If you don't have perseverance, but you're enormously talented, you'll probably not have a long career. That's a saying fact.
That's excellent advice. And I agree with you completely. I think that you have to write from your heart, but also, it's something that you have to do consider the market somewhat.
Yeah, as little as you possibly can consider it. But if you scope it and study it and decide what the public wants, they won't want that by the time you've written the novel. Changes too much. So it always ends up being what fascinates you, what idea grips you. And if it grips you, it'll grip the reader, one hopes.
Mm-hmm. Dean, you have written everything from fantasy to science fiction, horror, like you said, mystery, thrillers. Is there one subgenre that's harder to write than the others?
I've been asked a variation of that question, not quite that way before. But I will say the thing that's harder in some ways to really grip a reader with is a novel that's psychological suspense, where a character may have a deteriorating sense of themselves, or deteriorating psychology, or it's all about inward fears. It's much easier to throw a really cool monster at the reader and have them be electrified. The psychological suspense is a little harder to pull off. Another thing that's kind of harder to pull off, and I got in trouble for this too, but I love to do it, is salt a suspense novel with humor. So in novels like Life Expectancy, or in quite a few others, From the Corner of His Eye, One Flew Away from Heaven, I've done that. Sometimes I can remember when I delivered the second Christopher Snow novel, Seize the Night, the humor factor was so significant that my publisher almost was so angry he wouldn't talk to me fully about it. I told my agent I had to get rid of a bunch of these funny moments in the book. I thought the funny moments in the book made the scary moments scarier. All I was able to do was tone down the ending a little bit. But we were at such odds about that book that I thought, I'm supposed to write 3 Chris Snows. And here comes the next one. And this is my new publisher. They published Fear Nothing, and now they're about to publish Seize the Night. If I write a 3rd Chris Snow, which is going to be funny and suspenseful like the first two, I may have to get a new publisher after only 3 books. So that's why I moved on and wrote False Memory and a couple of others, thinking I would get back to Chris Snow, and I never had. And now I'm at a different publisher. So a lot of readers beat me up for that, but it wasn't my not wanting to write it, and I still think someday I might write it. But that's the kind of problem you run into. That are the kind of things I find harder, the human psychological suspense. But the harder it is, the more fun it is. Right?
Sure.
The easier it is, the more bored you become with it. I think then the more bored the public.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I certainly hope you do write that because we're looking forward to reading it. So outlining is, a circumstance of a great discussion in writing. And there are plotters, there are pantsers. Now, I'm a little bit more like pants on fire. So I was very happy to hear that you're an organic writer. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? And are you excited when you're surprised by a character?
Uh, I started out when I could sell a novel on an outline at one point after I published it. So I'd write an outline, sell it, get a little money up front, tell it on to write the novel. But I began to find that stifling. And the thing that particularly got me upset was publishers would have read the outline. But when the book got written, there were all kinds of changes that occurred because I am an organic writer. So the delivered book, in my estimation, would be a lot better than the outline. But from the publisher's view, this isn't what we bought. Uh, After I hit that several times and I was frustrated, I finally said, I'm going to try to write something with no outline. Um, and that first book was Strangers, which had an enormous cast. It was a quarter million words long or more. Uh, but I was able to keep all the storylines in my head and move back and forward. And I had more fun with that than I'd had with anything before. And after that, I said, no more outlines. I'll just come up with the premise and the characters that support that premise, and just begin and see where it goes. And that's the great thing about it, is what you said, the surprise factor. Because there's moments in every book where you didn't see that coming. You get to a chapter, you think you know what's about to happen next. But if the characters have come alive and have gripped this story, you'll suddenly be typing and some other thing starts to happen. And I've even had pause myself and say, no, 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 you can't do that. That's going to be too far out there. But I've learned to just trust my instinct, or trust actually what the characters are telling me. Get out of your stale old stuff and listen to me. This is what I want to do. And a lot of younger writers find that hard to understand. They say, well, you are creating that character. You're creating a story, so it's not as if these characters have free will. And I say, yes, it actually is in the strangest way. When they come fully alive, they do things that you didn't anticipate. That as they're starting to happen, you realize that has to happen because it's so within that character. And you don't know that character at the start as well as you do in page 200 of the manuscript. So if you were to plot out events, those events no longer match up to who the character has become. And I think that's where the character starts taking over. So I just begin with the premise. If it's a premise that starts it instead of characters. And then I look for the characters to support that premise, because from that premise is going to come certain themes. And I like to think about, what is this novel saying other than the plot? What is it about thematically? And then I look at the characters. What kind of character is this? Then as I get those characters, they have to have a certain charisma. I have to think, I'm going to like hearing what this character has to say or think. And then if that works, it works in the first 20 pages of the manuscript. If the characters aren't working at that point, they either have to reconceive or just throw it away and come up with another idea. And that's the way I work, grinding forward day by day. I do a lot of drafts at every page before moving on to the next one, simply because I'm a potential obsessive compulsive maniac, and that's the only way I can do it. That way doesn't work for everybody. It clearly is working.
I'm just curious with that, do you ever have like a bunch of words that you kind of basically have to put aside because you've written yourself a different direction, or do you just adapt as you go?
I adapt as I go. There usually isn't much to put aside because I will go over a page and rewrite it 10 or 20 times or more before going to the next page. Then there aren't a lot of wasted words or a misdirection I have to come back and excise. The thing there sometimes is something will evolve in the story that needs to have some preparation. I need to go back and plant something about a character. So you're told previously he has this ability or whatever. That is the most I tend to have to do. Uh, but when I get to the end of the chapter, I've gone over those pages over and over again. But then I print it out. When you print it out and look at it in front of you rather than on a screen, you see things you didn't see on the screen. Then I pencil it up and enter that. And do that usually with each part of the book as well as each chapter and gradually work to the end. The beauty of that is when I get to the end, I'm done. It isn't a first draft. It isn't something I have to go back to and think, oh God, now I got to go through this and make all this right. It's off the rails in various places. Some writers say to me, but how do you keep the momentum? In the strangest way, it doesn't affect the momentum of the storyline. In fact, what happens is, as you know, that when you're writing, there are moments when you look ahead and you think, uh-oh, you see something that's coming that you've created, some conflict, some moment where a character has to go here or there, and you don't know, how am I going to make that happen? How am I going to get those characters together? How am I going to get that character past that crisis? I haven't thought this through. Well, what's good about that slow approach, page by page, is I have found so many times that when I get to where I know that crisis is coming, although I think I haven't solved it, I have subconsciously. And I get there and I have sometimes 2 and 3 ways to go. So that's a beauty of the slowness. The subconscious is working on it at all times. And taking that slower approach certainly hasn't slowed down my volume. As you know, I've written a lot. So yeah, but again, it works for me. It may not work.
Well, Dean, my wife and I, we have 6 children, and one of my sons, Ryan Jr., is autistic. So I was fascinated to learn and read a little bit about how you and your wife created Canine Companions for Independence to provide service dogs to people with disabilities. And I was wondering, where'd that come from? How did that start?
Well, we didn't actually create it, but we've become contributors to it for many, many years now. It was originally founded by Charles Schultz, who did Peanuts, and his wife Jean, and it's become a national thing with campuses all over. There are a lot of good groups and some mediocre groups that provide assistance dogs for people with severe disabilities, but Canine Companions is the gold standard, and they're quite amazing. I was looking. You're always looking for characters you haven't written before in one way or another, so they're fresh. And I remember way back when I was writing Midnight, I saw an article about Canine Companions, and I thought, oh, I had this secondary character I wanted to have in Deep Jeopardy. I thought it would be interesting if it was a character in a wheelchair with an assistance dog, living alone with the dog in a town where everything is going to hell. And that would raise his level of jeopardy considerably. So I started researching all that. He isn't a major main character, but he's a fairly significant one. And I wrote the whole thing, and the novel came out. It happened to be my first one that hit #1. And I got a letter from the regional director of Canine Companions saying, we loved this character and so forth. When the paperback comes out, could you put a little notice in the back about Canine Companions that were real? And here's our address. And I thought I should have done that in hardcover. And then they said, well, why don't you come and see us at it was that time in San Diego. Now the local California one is in Oceanside. And we went to that and we were totally taken. So amazing. So we've been involved with it for many years now. And one thing they started doing a number of years ago was providing dogs to autistic children. And I can remember the first time we saw one of these. We went to a graduation of about 14 people who've gotten their assistance dogs. And it takes 2 weeks living on campus to learn to handle the dog. And in the case of this child who was autistic, the parents have to learn to handle the dog. And I saw this boy. They did film of people coming to the campus with the first day they're there, and they walk you through all of their training. And they show this film at every graduation ceremony, which There's usually a couple of thousand on the up, and they're very moving. And we saw this boy who had severe behavioral problems, and his mother had to take care of him and had to take him with her where she went. And they showed us her going into the grocery store. She had to have the boy in a harness and almost with like a leash because he was trying to grab things and so forth. And after 2 weeks with this dog, they showed them going through the supermarket again, and the boy was completely calm. Behavior totally changed. And throughout this graduation ceremony, it lasts a couple of hours, and often graduates on stage for extended period. This boy was petting his dog and was perfectly calm. And I thought, this is mysterious, strange, fascinating to me. And I have ever since wanted to write a character like that. And I did and devoted the first book about Thomas and Mercy. And got to write a boy. And since then, because of our connection to canines, we've met quite a number of children like this and their families. And it's just, it was great to have fun writing about it, because one thing you learn about a lot of autistic children is they're maybe very bright indeed, but there's a disconnect with how they're able to interact with the world. And I find that interesting, and what a challenge that is for the child and parents. So when a dog can make that difference, wow, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I absolutely loved Devoted. I thought it was a brilliant novel, and the point of views were very spot on. I felt like really connected with the young autistic boy as well as the dog, which became my favorite character. So, so early on in your career, Dean, you made a bold move and bought back a number of your novels. And was that to protect the brand that you had in mind? And how would you define your brand?
In those days, I didn't think of myself as a brand.
Okay.
I thought of myself as an idiot who had gotten lucky. It was, I wasn't a bestseller yet, and I'd had all these science fiction novels, and frankly, most of them weren't any good. That's what I mostly read as a kid, mostly wanted to write when I first started writing. Then I drifted into suspense and a comic novel, and I found that I started very soon thereafter moving to start blending things, because I've always read in multiple genres. And so I looked at it, and I had a number of suspense novels, a number of science fiction novels. I didn't want the science fiction out there anymore, because I knew that as long as that was in print, I would be called a science fiction writer. And I had stopped being that and didn't want to be it anymore. So my wife and I agreed we couldn't afford this, that we agreed we had to get those rights back. In some cases, there were term licenses. In others, there weren't. The terms were much longer. And we just took it upon ourselves to where we could get it back at no charge, we did it. And then if we had to pay to get it back, we did. And often publishers, the book would almost have earned out its advance. In some cases, it would have earned royalty. But when I wanted to buy it back, they wanted me to pay them back what they had paid me as an advance. And I can remember so many writers saying, "You're insane. You're paying what they paid you. You've done the book for nothing, and you're never going to put it back in print." And I never thought about brand. I just thought identity, essentially, is what I thought. I want this different identity, and this is the only way I'm going to get it. And then, as I started looking at the suspense novels, there were some I thought, well, those I don't want to see in print again, because I was learning, and they're not up where I am now. But there were some that I thought really had value that I could put my name on that had been under pen names. So we started buying those back as well. We had a scrimp and say to do this and cut expenditures and everything. But the story that every, I think, writer would like most about this is I had 5 books at a publisher that were under the same pen name, or 4. I had 4 books at this publisher. I've written 5 of it. And we went to that publisher, and they still had years to go on the license. And my agent says Dean would like to buy these back. And they were not anymore really aggressively publishing these. And we were prepared to then say, no, fine, return to us what we paid you and you can have them back. Instead, the publisher, in kind of snarky way, said, oh, he can have them back for nothing. They aren't worth anything. He used the S word. Uh, and I said, really? You're not going to? No. These are nothing. Nobody's going to want these novels anyway. So we have no intention of maintaining them infinitely. The first of those was a book called Servants of Twilight. And I was on the brink of hitting the bestseller list, which we were beginning to see that this was going to happen, and not seeing that it was going to go as far as it went. But Servants of Twilight was the first of those books that he gave me back for nothing because it went and it went to number one on the New York Times paperback list for 6 weeks and sold 2 million copies the first year. That was one of the most wonderful vengeances I've ever had against somebody who was snarky with me. And I didn't have to say a thing. I just knew he was well aware.
Wow, that's quite a story.
I mean, it really is. Dean, I think I speak for Kim and I both, and people who'll be watching this, that we could talk with you forever. We don't want to keep you. But I'm dying to know, with Elsewhere set to hit bookstores, what is next for you?
I've delivered a book called The Other Emily, which is very different from Devoted and from Elsewhere. And I'll just give you a little tweet thing about it. It's a fellow who, he's a writer, and 2 months of the year he comes back to California, lives in New York City. 2 months of the year he comes back to Newport Beach, California, where he has a little cottage. And we learn that he lived here with a woman he was in love with, and she disappeared 10 years ago. And it's always been believed she was one of the victims of a serial killer that killed 27 women on the coast. And she disappeared in the area that he was prowling in the very time he was doing it. He has since ended up in prison, but 14 of that he's admitted 17 abductions and killings. 14 of them, no bodies have not been found. And he says is mummified them and stored them away for revitalization whenever he gets out of prison, which someday he'll be able to get out. And Arlie thinks this insane person may be where her body is. He just wants to get her back. But it's something he knows that never will happen, but he goes to visit this killer in prison. This is all right at the beginning. He comes back to California and he goes out to dinner, and sitting at the bar is a woman he hasn't seen in 10 years. And he goes up to sit beside her and he says, "Where have you been?" And she looks at him and says, That's a stupid pickup line for a writer as successful as you are. Where have you been all my life? He said, I didn't say all my life. Where have you been 10 years? But he realizes pretty quickly this can't be her because she looks 25 and she's now 35. But there is something about her because she starts misleading him. She starts telling him things. And that all takes place in the first couple of chapters. I had enormous fun with it. It's very different. It's sort of a retelling of the Orpheus legend about Orpheus' journey into the afterlife to bring Eurydice back. But it's very modern kind of version. So that one's done. I've almost finished another one. I'm working on nameless stories. I had 6 of those that Amazon Original Stories did, and they asked me to do 6 more, and I'm halfway through that.
So Elsewhere is your new one. Now I think I speak for readers in general when I say that The Other Emily sounds fantastic. I cannot wait to get my hands on that one too. So, hey, thank you, Dean, for coming on and being our first big guest for Thriller Talk.
Well, thanks for having me. I'll do it anytime.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Dean. Thank you kindly.
Thank you. Take care.